Just to get started, why don't you can start, Justin, and just introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah, I'm Justin Smith, the Executive Director of B2B for VML Y&R, and I also lead the B2B Council within WPP, and it's an integrated B2B practice globally.
Hello, I'm Ben Hinson. I am the Director of Analytics for Quigley Simpson. We are one of the largest women-owned agencies in the U.S. And our philosophy is functioning at the intersection of brand demand and engagement. And yeah, just happy to be here.
Hey guys, I'm Lance De Montero. I'm at Horizon Next, which is Horizon Media's kind of more performance-based agency. I'm a VP on the digital team. I primarily work on the SafeLight account. Hopefully everyone here has seen a SafeLight ad in the past, few months.
I just saw one.
Yeah. Nice. And I also oversee CTV innovation for Horizon Next, so I'm really excited to be here, meeting with people like Curve and different partners and bringing new technology to our teams.
Okay, great. Well, let's get right to it. Well, first of all, just as a general question in terms of how are you really planning across media? We'll start with you, Lance, and just like what type of tactics are you looking at overall?
Yeah, we on SafeLight we take a really full funnel measurement approach, but generally speaking we're really everywhere. We buy lots of linear TV, CTV, lots of display, social. We're on TikTok, lots of paid search. I think like lots of other agencies, we have internal tools that kind of help us with our media mix overall. But one thing that we're particularly focused on is frequency. So SafeLight's a need-based product, right? You don't need it unless you need it. With frequency, we're very sensitive to saturation and kind of nailing the right frequency, our sort of sweet spot. But essentially, if our frequency is too high, then we'd rather reinvest our dollars to reach a new car owner, so that we have a better chance at driving a conversion. So whenever we're doing our media planning, we pay special attention to what our overall reach and frequency is, and are pulling different levers with our media mix.
Okay, and moving down for you, Ben, in terms of what are you mostly focusing on? What are the obviously Lance talked about frequency. Is there anything that sort of jumps out at you that is the number one thing to look out for, I guess?
Well, at Quigley, when we're doing media planning, we tend to start with the audience first. We do a lot of audience research, a lot of looking at research studies from syndicated partners like ComScore, MRI, and so on. We also look at actual data is always the best, right? Actual performance. So we have RAP reports from historical data from similar partners we're interested in, or new partners with similar campaigns. We look at that information. So we do that holistic research first. We look at customer journeys. We try to understand the different pain points for different customers, the drop-off points, what they like, what they don't like, what media channels they like to spend time on, what video channels. And then we use all that information to craft our media plan, and also tailoring it to the business goals. So, a media plan for an airline industry, an airline client, will be different from a media plan for a retail store, right? One might be more proximity focused, another one might be more looking at intent signals of people who are looking to book a flight, and so on. So, full funnel approach, like he said. But more focused with the audience first.
And Justin, how about you?
Yeah, very similar to everybody else on the panel, I would say, of course, the dimension that's somewhat unique in B2B, especially in the enterprise space, is it's mostly around accounts and markets. And accounts is emerging as sort of the end-all, be-all, especially in the enterprise space, where increasingly you see P&L leaders in the B2B realm who might have a cross-functional remit across both sales and marketing. Increasingly, I'm starting to partner with CMOs that sales development representatives and BDRs are rolling up under their orgs. And so when they think about allocating spend, they have to sort of decide, is it an incremental body and sales development or business development, or is it a campaign? And in the account realm, more than anything, what we're essentially looking at, and one of the elements I wanted to bring to this conversation is video is coming up more and more because of how much sort of the future and the current state of work has transformed over the last several years. And increasingly, video in a lot of ways in B2B, and especially enterprise B2B, was sort of a no-go zone to a certain extent. I mean, not just the measurability sort of component, but the fact that it's when do you capture a person in the right moment to give them that sort of B2B message. But so many people work from home now, and although I'm not hands-on keyboard doing any day-to-day planning, I can say that increasingly it is top of mind with the marketers I work with.
Well, I want to actually, oh, did you want to add something, Ben?
Yeah, I was going to, like for B2B, so my past life, I was doing a lot of B2B marketing. I'm just more of point of curiosity. So looking at the different decision makers in a company, right? That's the key thing, like who is the person who's going to make that decision for this big investment you're looking at, right? Like, not necessarily a question, but I'm curious to know how video plays into that whole segmentation of like parsing through different decision makers. I mean, do you do a LinkedIn play? What's your...
Yeah, I mean, well, not to be an attorney about it, but it depends, right? I mean, it depends on a whole host of factors, and I would say that the key is that if you have a robust, high-fidelity measurement regime in place, and that you can sort of coalesce that around with a lot of different stakeholders, especially as we sort of talked about before our panel, like in marketing, finance, and other functional areas, you've got that initial buy-in, and you've established what performance and success sort of looks like, which makes the decision-making process in order to get sign-offs much easier. And in some ways, and we could talk about it in part of one of the other questions, is there's a way increasingly that I'm seeing in this space to take a more formulaic approach to unlock additional budget when we hit certain performance goals quarter over quarter, so that it's not going back constantly and asking for permission, but we've demonstrated that we've hit those KPIs, we've demonstrated the efficacy and the effectiveness of these campaigns, and that automatically unlocks additional budget.
Lance, I want you to actually, because I know you talked about transparency or frequency, sorry, and again, you talked about earlier when we spoke what you're doing with programmatic, and that has always been initially doing programmatic. That was an issue, frequency, but you seem to have solved that. Talk about that a little bit and why you're much more excited about it.
Yeah, when it comes to frequency, so in my day-to-day, I'm doing lots of digging into programmatic CTV overall, so that's really kind of been where I've been living. But when it comes to frequency, I really hung on to programmatic just for the sake of the frequency management controls that you're able to get. So when you buy direct with CTV partners, all the partners have frequency caps, right? Hulu will have their cap, CNN has their cap, Peacock has their cap. But obviously, with the way video is, it's so fragmented, people are watching different things. So it's really easy for the holistic frequency to really get out of control. If you're, even if you have a frequency cap of 1 per day on Hulu, 1 per day on CNN, that could, easily turn into, 10, 15 or whatever a month, right? And that's probably too much. So with programmatic, you can do, I would do more of campaign level frequency caps, but also at the advertiser level. So, instead of a frequency cap by network, you have it by campaign, but then you also have it by advertiser within your account. So, let's say you're reaching someone within the local campaign, and then you'll make sure that you're not reaching them again in the national campaign and onwards. So it kind of keeps that under control. The other thing when it comes to frequency that I have found pretty helpful from a performance standpoint is looking at within programmatic the frequency bucket level reporting. So essentially going in the DSP and seeing how many, at a household level, how many times someone is seeing an ad, let's say going back 30 days, and then you'll see that probably most of your delivery will be at a frequency level of 1, and then it'll start to get to 2, 3, and onwards, all the way up to 10 or so, whatever your cap is. But what I would do is, especially if you're a performance based advertiser, I would look at the essentially use the household as a denominator. so that you can calculate your conversion rate at the frequency bucket level. So instead of using impression as a denominator, you're essentially saying the households that saw an ad one time, what's their overall conversion rate for the month? Twice, 3, 4, 5 times. It might be fair to say that if someone saw an ad once in the past month, 1 out of 1,000 ads, it probably didn't make that much of a difference, and we didn't make an impact, right? But maybe 10 is too much, and especially if it's a need-based product, you don't need to reach them an 11th time. But maybe the sweet spot is maybe like 4 to 7 is where you're seeing that really high conversion rate, and you're seeing the message resonate. So then you can kind of like target that as a sweet spot when you're doing your planning.
Well, and so getting onto that for Justin, let me pose the same question as far as performance impact. How are you measuring that? Have your KPIs changed?
Yeah, one of the big ones that is emerging for us in a very interesting way, especially in, again, going back to this idea of the enterprise B2B, where there's very long sales cycles, it's difficult to measure the performance impact of a lot of different tactics. And one of the areas in video in particular that's helping us make the case for the investment in video is tying it, there's a couple things I'll talk about. One is a multidimensional model of engagement, which is looking at really those rudimentary sort of engagement metrics like on-site, dwell, click depth index, et cetera. But the emerging one is share of search and understanding how our upper funnel video tactics impact share of search, because that becomes a leading indicator in terms of the efficacy of those sorts of deployments and investments. And while it may not lead, we can't necessarily tie it back to those business outcomes directly in a direct line, we can take a stepwise approach to sort of understand the impact and how that applies to a customer journey.
Ben, do you want to say what you guys are doing?
Not much to add what these two gentlemen have said. I think one thing to think about is the different types of video across different channels. So social, for example, has stories and live. That's all video, right? CTV is a unique, is a whole monster in itself. So each channel has its strengths and weaknesses. For YouTube, for example, it's the amount of time you spend on the video. For a Facebook Live, it might be like, does the user stay on for like 10 seconds? That's a good cap for like, okay, they're somewhat engaged. If it's going into like cost efficiency metrics, right? So like CTV, cost per completed view, those sorts of things, other things I would add to what these guys have said. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's, again, with all these different channels, and you obviously, you can go to each individually, but then when it comes to attribution, which is something everyone's still struggling with, and are there better ways to determine the success rather than maybe attribution is not the focus? Maybe you're looking at, I know when we spoke with both you guys, I think, Justin, you brought it up first, but then Lance completely agreed, was incrementality. Talk about that and why that is so more important.
Yeah, I'll briefly touch on that. So we do quite a bit of incrementality testing in B2B, and because we're very fortunate that the budgets sort of support it with the enterprise clients that we have and with our teams. But one of the elements that we bring to it that's a little bit unique, and I touched on this earlier, is this idea of a multidimensional model for engagement. And a lot of incrementality testing is done on a conversion point, whether it's a sale, et cetera. But as I mentioned, it's quite difficult in B2B to sort of measure those outcomes, especially with these very long longitudinal sales cycles. So what we've done is we devise incrementality testing where we're looking at our control groups and the testing groups, and we add a dimension of differentiation around engagement. So again, going back to this idea of a multidimensional model, for example, one test group might be what is dwell time, and what does that then lead into share of search? Or we might take another one, which is where does this in terms of click depth index? So this ad led to how many page views over a certain set of time, and then using that as a group. Ultimately, with the dream of then being able to pull in, again in the B2B space, CRM data and tie that back to dispositional outcomes as part of these deals. But it's difficult because they take so long. So we don't really have a clear indication up front in terms of how effective these campaigns might be. So we have to rely on these leading indicators and try and continually test them to suss out the ones that are high fidelity. And increasingly, we are noticing that by taking this engagement approach and factoring, and I won't go down this whole road because it gets very complicated, but then starting to sort of code for sales engagement, like the sales touch points, because those are very important as well, and how those might inform additional tactics that we might do depending on where a person might be in a buying journey. I can say that increasingly it's working. By having this approach, we generally, with our clients, will ask them to set aside up to about 15% of the budget for incrementality testing. And the results kind of prove themselves out to where we're noticing that the ones that work out, we can increase the spend there, like I said, in a very formulaic fashion. The ones that we don't, we cut.
Lance, what about you? The same type of situation? Because I remember when Justin said it, you hadn't thought about it, and then he said it, and he was like, "Oh yeah, yeah."
Yeah, when it comes to incrementality, it just so everyone kind of understands what that's saying is, when it comes to attribution is a lot of the way you think about it. It's measurement tools being at the right place at the right time. So if I saw an ad on Hulu and then I went and bought something, 8 days later, we're attributing credit to that ad I saw 8 days ago. And that's the reporting, and that's last touch attribution, and we love it. But when it comes to incrementality, that's the holy grail, right? We're trying to understand, out of a control and exposed group, does the exposed group, are they more likely to take action? So when it comes to incrementality testing, I would do the extra due diligence to make sure your test design is set up correctly. I think everyone wants to do incrementality, but I think jumping right into it and trying to do it as quick as possible is a quick way to fail. I think getting a campaign up and off the ground, let's say at least 2 to 3 weeks to establish a baseline is important, because you really need to establish what your minimal detectable lift is, because when it comes to incrementality, you're looking for that statistical significance, right? You're not just looking for luck. And you want to be, at the very least at that 80% confidence level. So when you have your analytics team kind of do the feasibility calculators, it's going to, 80% confidence will be this budget, 90% will be this budget. Figure out what kind of confidence level you're comfortable with. But it's important to get a baseline conversion rate, because otherwise you're just kind of guessing at what that conversion rate will be. So once you do have what a baseline conversion rate is, you can essentially run off to the races and then do the calculation of what a exposed conversion rate should be for an exposed group versus a control. And then you can essentially calculate how much budget you need to hit, over, whatever it is, 3.5% or so lift, and then kind of go it that way. But it's a very involved process. I would give yourself at least 4 weeks at the very least. And then things have to go right as well. So you really have to think really hard about the external factors at hand. So if you're trying to do a conversion lift study or incrementality study during holidays and you're an e-commerce brand, that might not make the most sense. Something that we kind of ran into, we want to do an incrementality study for Safe Flight, but then we kind of went into lockdown, March 2020. People weren't wanting to make appointments anymore, so conversion rate was low. So we didn't see any lift. The other thing that I would really watch out on, I could probably talk about this for all day, but noise. So doing an incrementality test with your CTV partners, that's well and great, but you have to think really hard about how much linear is running. How much is that control group actually a control group? So one thing that we are kind of running into is we're buying a lot of YouTube, and YouTube, being a walled garden, how do you actually categorize this audience as a control group with so much YouTube running that's unaccounted for? I don't know if there's anyone that has that figured out yet, but would love to hear it if you do. But yeah.
Well, we do have the round table at the end, so you can share that. But Ben, I know that you look at it more. I mean, how are you looking at performance, or is that your main focus at this point? Is it, or is it upper funnel as well?
Yeah, I love everything that was just said. I agree, incrementality testing and addressing the threats to the validity of a test. So he mentioned history effect, Simpson's paradox. I don't want to get too technical, but yes, I agree 100% with looking at those tests. I'll add another layer to it, tying incremental lift to actual users and households is is the next, I think, level of measurement for cross-screen and video. So what I mean by that is getting into the identity resolution space. So, for example, with CTV or OTT or, at large, I know some partners, DSP partners, have the ability to port household level impression data. You can receive that, and if you can get that data from them, you can explore using clean rooms to resolve these IDs in a hashed format to hash these IDs. And then you can kind of now take what he said even a step further to do closed loop measurement to now start tying ROI to that number. So yeah, I agree 100%. I'm 100% agree with incrementality. I think that's like the core base. And then the future is what I just said, in my opinion at least, is identity resolution, for sure.
Well, how are you taking that information and then optimizing these campaigns? Like, where are you getting your learnings from, and what KPIs are really, again, I asked that before, but what I think with all the different channels, they're starting to change. At least that's what I've been hearing. Is that the case for you or with your clients?
I think if you're taking incremental results, obviously by whatever KPI you're measuring incrementality against, you can use that to look at partner selection, different levers with frequency, like you said, what audiences are responding, so know what to target, which partners are indexing high for certain audiences. If you get into the return on ad spend equation, taking it a step further, you can start to prioritize the partners you use based on their return on ad spend they give you. So yeah, I would say those are different levers you can use for optimization, for sure.
How about for you, Justin?
Yeah, I think increasingly, and I'll hyper focus on, which is a huge area, like in the sort of software, cloud computing, anything that sort of has this idea of recurring revenue, which the number one metric is net dollar retention. And that's not something that necessarily as marketers and advertisers we ever really think about or we talk about. However, the respective business leaders and P&L owners in those businesses, that's what they use to guide their entire business. And so increasingly we're looking at ways to tie all our various tactics, regardless of where they might be, to how that affects net dollar retention. And again, it becomes a very stepwise fashion where taking, for example, view through attribution to an ad that somebody sort of saw and how that might impact net dollar retention down the line in 7 months, it's beyond muddy. But taking a stepwise approach and understanding how one thing leads to another, that then leads to another, that is emerging more and more as a framework, if you will, from a measurement perspective. And then we overlay to that, very similarly to what Ben's talking about from identity resolution. In my space, it's this idea of account level resolution and understanding, because in B2B, whether it's formal or informal, there's generally a decision-making committee. These large purchases are not necessarily made by a single person. There's procurement involved in a lot of cases. There's finance involved. Depends obviously on what the product or the service is. So to be able to sort of resolve and understand what that decision-making committee looks like and being able to reach them with the right message at the right time, which is obviously our big dream in this entire industry, becomes the most important.
Lance, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just I thought it was interesting you brought up the point about just revenue at large. I think that if you're working with a programmatic partner, like with a DSP, one thing that I would encourage is to, as much as you can, pull in dynamic parameters so that you can get a more quantifiable view of the quality of conversions that you're driving. So for Safelight, it could be something like an order ID, but essentially, you get these order IDs, you can pull in revenue information, and then, once you have that, you can start to optimize more towards ROAS or to, overall revenue per job, per conversion, as opposed to just, going after conversion volume. Other than that, let's see.
Well, I know you also said it's about the different partners. I mean, because you can't necessarily take them at face value. You have to know exactly what data they're giving you. How can you ensure that?
Yeah, when it comes to measurement partners, one thing that I've been kind of preaching is to really look at proof versus promises. a lot of measurement partners say that they can do a lot of things. Really, digging into the capabilities, but also what you want to do is kind of make sure that the data makes sense for your business. So if you know you're buying a lot of Fox News and the frequency is showing that it's really low, then that's something that obviously doesn't make sense. So I think doing a little bit more due diligence and making sure that your placements are set up correctly, the tracking, the pixels appended to all the placements correctly, all the impressions are flowing through. There shouldn't be more than 10% or so discrepancy between what the ad server is showing versus the measurement partner. Those are the kind of things that can lead to headaches if you don't kind of catch it quickly. Yeah.
Just keep on top of it. Well, I have one more question for you guys, but then we will open it up to questions if you have any. And we'll just start, Justin, with you. What's the most valuable thing? I mean, you've been testing a lot. You've been doing a lot of different things. What are you most excited about moving forward with?
Yeah, I'm a bit of a contrarian in this regard, in that I'm most excited about what the future looks like in terms of measurement and tracking in this post-third-party cookie world. Because I think that Google's a large client of mine. I don't have any proprietary insight into what the Privacy Sandbox is working on from Phlox and Fledge, but I can say that we increasingly, if you just look at ad spend year over year, you take that as one component. The second component, you think of the amount of scrutiny that business leaders are putting on the return on that spend. Well, what lies in the middle of that? Well, it has to be a measurement solution. And so I'm most excited for the innovation that's going to occur. And again, this is a bit of a contrarian view. So you take those two components, the one in the middle, and then add the fact that we've had massive tech layoffs this year and the last year. So all of the cool stuff and the innovation that's going to occur in the space over the next 2 to 3 years, I can't even imagine the types of solutions that we're going to begin to see.
Ben, how about you now? Let's go more in what you've done, actually, is what you hope for, and just it's something that maybe you've a strategy or just that you're excited about that's been working and you really want to continue doing or even expand on.
When it comes to cross-screen measurement, in my past life before my current role, I was heavily involved in the identity resolution space, and I had never been exposed to that before. So it was really exciting to see solutions around this post-cookie world, the ability to stitch data and consumer touch points across the digital landscape and even offline, and do that in a privacy-friendly way in literally what is a data warehouse, right? That's pretty much what a clean room is. So I thought that was pretty cool, and being able to port that information into CDPs and all these other platforms to help with targeting and advertising. So I would say identity resolution is something that I'm personally very interested in. I think it's Amazon, Google, all these guys have massive clean room investments, and it's there for a reason, right? Because they kind of see where the future is going. So I think the agencies and companies that really invest in clean room technology and being able to take first-party data, CTV, household data, as he said, and being able to tie that to business outcomes, as he said, with ROAS and stuff, I think that's where this industry is going, for sure.
Lance?
Yeah, I'd say just to add on top of the identity solutions, I know that there's a lot being developed right now, but excited for partners to kind of come to the table and work more closely with advertisers and agencies to help the match rates increase. We can do all this audience work and really nail what our perfect target audience is, and give it a name, kind of thing. But then when the pipes are connected and our reach is very low, then it really kind of is kind of stops the momentum. So we're really looking for those integrations to really take place, and for more of those technical details to be ironed out, so that we can get as much scale as we can, which is really important when we're trying to do incrementality tests, where reach is really important to the campaign.
Great. Do we have any questions for these guys?
I have a question. So I've been noticing a lot more pause ads nowadays. What do you guys think about that? How do you measure pause ads, I guess, compared to what is shown like as an active like video spot? Do you do any frequency? Is there like a way to frequency cap the pause ads with the ads that are playing like during the commercial break on CTV?
There should be a way. I mean, the pause ad, I'm thinking, things like Hulu, maybe Peacock. There should be frequency caps on your IO for that, and maybe it could be a little higher. Maybe they're pausing a couple times during the show. So I don't think that when you think about the user experience, you see multiple pause ad in one instance. It's not as annoying as seeing a 30-second spot like 4 or 5 times. But what I would do for a pause ad is make sure that you have an adequate brand lift measurement tool appended so that you can measure shift in attitudinal metrics like preference, awareness, consideration, recommendation intent, things of that sort. And then I would assume that like a unit like that would get a lot of reach as well. So I look at cost per unique reach and see how effective it is at driving not only awareness but also reach, because those units are very expensive. So it's kind of up to you to determine if it's worth it, or obviously it's high impact, but what is the actual impact? So I would take special caution to make sure that you're measuring that impact adequately.
You said something that's very interesting. I was thinking about this last night. So when it comes to brand lift and stuff, one thing I've realized is from the agency side is you can pixel all these partners, right? Like your publishers or whoever the case may be. But then you report on brand lift either from a publisher perspective or from a holistic partner like a Cantor or a Lucid and so on. But often those brand lift results differ from what the clients are doing, because they often have like these spot trackers that are more like they run surveys at a set in time versus like tracking media over time. So obviously sometimes it's a conflict between both worlds, right? What is the source of truth with brand measurement? So yeah, I agree 100% what he said, but it just made me think about that conflict that sometimes comes up from an agency perspective. Yeah, I don't know if you've run into that issue.
I have in the past. What I would do in that regard is just make sure that there's a level set, that a campaign brand lift study is different from a holistic brand tracker, because the audience or the universe for the campaign brand lift study is those exposed to the campaign. Whereas the brand tracker has lots of external factors involved, and the economy or political situations could have an impact on what a holistic brand tracker would be saying, and the methodologies obviously could be very different.
Great. Well, guys, we do. I can't see. It's the light.
Sorry, question is for Justin more specifically.
Who are you?
Oh, sorry, Patrick McConney from Semel Media. In the B2B context, I'm wanting to understand if you have either tried this or if you haven't tried it, what your thoughts are on it. Obviously, you mentioned like CRM data is very paramount to those organizations. Knowing it's possible to, take those sets of emails or take that sets of account data, right, and then put it into, at least on digitally, a video buy, right? How has that been successful? I would assume maybe scale might not be there, but like, is that something you've done? If you haven't done it, what are your thoughts on it? Knowing that like technically it is possible to do.
Yeah, we have done it, and we've done it with relative success. And I would say the other piece that's interesting is increasingly, you may be familiar with some of the they call them ABM intent signal providers, like the Bombers, the Tech Targets, et cetera, who bring in a proprietary layer of data that you can then use a clean room to then sort of match on the CRM side. But then this is where then the measurement thing gets a little bit fishy, because then there's several different layers of measurement that you have to do. You've got your first party measurement that you might be doing with, like, let's say GA or something like that. Then you've got their as a signal provider, their level of measurement, and then sometimes they've got their own DSP, sometimes they're leveraging somebody else's DSP. That's a whole nother third set of measurements. So I would say that, and this actually in some ways goes back to this idea of how do you reconcile like different like sets of insights. I think is kind of to some degree what you were talking about, Ben. And in a lot of cases, like you may not be able to, and I think it's okay to sort of admit that and just sort of say like, there's no perfect way to sort of do this. We don't have a way to have the highest fidelity possible. But again, increasingly being able to tie it to some sort of outcome, factoring for the external factors, what might be happening macroeconomically. What if, you never know, somebody's team won the Super Bowl, and that could create massive lift for them and spend, but maybe it's not related exactly to advertising. But being open about that, I think, is the way to go. And again, to pinpoint on your question, we're having increasing success with that. But I would say the piece for us, which touches on Lance's point with frequency, is it's a very small universe. And so we end up oversaturating these audiences, even trying to control for that as best that we possibly can with our partners. Which is a little bit of an issue. So that's a trade-off. So that makes it not an easy decision to make in every case.
Okay. Oh,
Justin Poe, Evans Hardy Young. Since Lance and Justin, your companies are part of this certification thing that just was announced, can you guys talk about sort of how you're helping certify the measurement companies and what that would entail?
I'll let Lance go because I have absolutely no idea.
Okay.
Yeah, could you just expand on which, there's a lot of conversations that we're part of.
It's the Joint Institute. I just saw it pop up on LinkedIn, and so Horizon and WP and a bunch of the holding companies are holding the measurement companies to a unified certification to try to, I think, kind of get at what Justin was saying. There's all these disparate ways of measuring things. How do you, do it across different platforms and that sort of thing? And if you don't know, that's okay. I was just curious since I had you on on stage.
Yeah, so I'm probably peripherally part of some of these conversations, but I think this goes back to what I was kind of saying earlier in terms of just overall like auditing of measurement partners, looking at the reporting and having case studies internally are helpful, so that we know that a measurement partner, where they're coming up short and where where their strengths are. Something that I've seen that has been particularly encouraging for a measurement partner is, when you're doing an audit, it's one thing you want to start out at is your source of truth. So you want to compare the measurement output to something, right? So for us, the ad server is just impressions, but when we rely on reporting from a DSP and they have an output for reach frequency, it's really encouraging to see that the device graph, the household device graph, and the way it's identifying unique reach and then a frequency, but seeing that match up to a measurement partner gives us a lot of confidence in that measurement solution. And when we see on the flip side, when we see the outputs vary widely, then we kind of run into like, who do we trust and what's right here, and face that dilemma. So I know that we're doing a lot of work trying to figure out what solutions kind of make the most sense. I know that there's lots of, like with the ACR environment, lots of measurement partners are licensing that data and they're using it. Partners say they can measure YouTube, but like, how are they actually measuring YouTube? Are they just licensing data? Which there's nothing wrong with that, but if that's what they're doing, it's good to be transparent about that. And then looking at what the deterministic set is and how much modeling is involved. Once there is modeling, like what's their philosophy and how they're modeling it, and the approach they're taking to have it match to be nationally representative. Those are the kind of things that we're kind of diving into with all the different holistic video measurement partners.
okay. All right. Well, you guys, thank you so much, Lance, Ben, and Justin. I really appreciate it. Big round of applause for these guys.